Hello there. As night quietly arrives and your tired eyes begin to close, let me share a story, slow, soft, and full of warmth. It's the story of a scarf, a half-knitted scarf left in an old wooden drawer. No one ever finished it because Grandma had left that little house one winter ago. But the scarf remained, holding warmth, memories, and the kind of love that often goes unsaid. If you're ready, close your eyes and let's begin together. In the old room where Grandma used to live, there was a wooden cabinet, faded with time, with a brass handle that had turned dark. One chilly afternoon, her granddaughter returned to tidy up the space. She opened the lowest drawer. Under layers of blankets, she found a soft, half-knitted scarf in a dusty brown color. The knitting needles were still in place, and the leftover yarn coiled gently on the side. The scarf smelled faintly of lavender and of Grandma's favorite tea. She held it close. Her heart tightened. She closed her eyes. Memories returned like the first breeze of winter, soft and cool. Afternoons spent by the fireplace, sitting beside Grandma, who always had yarn in her lap. Her hands trembled slightly, but she knitted steadily. "Grandma, what are you making?" "A warm scarf for my little girl when she's off in the big city." She smiled at the thought. Simple words, but enough to warm an entire winter. Sometimes the stitches slipped. Grandma would sigh gently. "Oh well, I'll redo it." The little girl didn't understand patience back then, but Grandma never scolded. She just quietly unraveled the mistake and began again. Perhaps the scarf had been undone and reknitted countless times. Like love, not always perfect, but persistent, willing, quietly strong. One rainy day, Grandma said, "There were winters with no firewood, so I knitted scarves for everyone. Not pretty, but warm." She smiled. "Scarves aren't made to look good, my dear. They're made to keep people from feeling cold, especially inside." From that day on, the girl saw the scarf differently. It wasn't just a gift. It was a part of Grandma's heart, woven by hand. That winter, the one when her granddaughter moved away for school, Grandma had started knitting the scarf, hoping to send it later. But she fell ill, and quietly she passed away, just as gently as she had lived. The scarf remained untouched. No one had the heart to finish it. No one quite had Grandma's patience. In the coat pocket behind the door, she found a folded note. Shaky handwriting, familiar paper. "I'll send the scarf tomorrow. Maybe you won't need it anymore, but keep it anyway. Because if I'm not there beside you, this scarf will hold you close for me." The ink had faded, but the love was still strong, as if written just yesterday. For the first time, she picked up the needles. She didn't know how, but she tried anyway. The stitches were tight, uneven, but slowly they grew. Like love, unfinished, but still possible to continue, if only someone cares enough to try. A few days later, the scarf was done. It wasn't perfect, not like Grandma's, but as she wrapped it around her neck, she didn't feel cold anymore. That night, she sat by the window, scarf snug, and heart quiet. The wind was cold, but it no longer bit, because Grandma's warmth was still there, in every thread, every memory, every silent, loving stitch. That afternoon, The air was crisp with early winter. She opened the old wooden window in Grandma's room to let in some fresh air. In the corner stood a low wooden chair. Resting against its back was a small pillow covered in faded floral fabric. It looked worn but clean, as if no one had dared to move it. She sat down, leaning into it. The pillow was soft and somehow still warm, or perhaps it was just her memory. As a child, she often played in the garden while Grandma sat by this very window, a cup of hot tea or a handkerchief in her lap. The breeze would drift in. Grandma would gaze quietly toward the garden, rows of mustard greens and bright yellow chrysanthemums. She once asked, "What are you thinking about, Grandma?" Grandma smiled. "Nothing at all. Just sitting here makes my heart feel lighter." She hadn't understood then, but she did now. She remembered the pillow had been handmade by Grandma from a blouse with small summer flowers Grandma used to wear. The fabric had worn thin over time, but the stitches remained firm. She ran her hand over one corner. There was a small tear, carefully hand-stitched, straight, neat, just like Grandma. She smiled. Even a back pillow had been made with such care. There were rainy afternoons when she'd read inside, and Grandma still sat by the window. No one spoke. They just shared the same space. That little pillow, tucked behind Grandma's back, seemed to hold her in place, between life's weariness and quiet strength. Now it was her turn to sit there, leaning on that same pillow, and feeling a peace she hadn't known she missed. When she unzipped the pillow cover to wash it, she found something unexpected. A tiny stitched line hidden on the inside flap. A day of stillness is a day to remember. Just that. But somehow it felt like Grandma was speaking to her again, right there, in that quiet moment. Grandma once said, "When you're tired, don't try to do more. Sit still for a while. Your heart knows how to heal itself." After washing, she hung the pillowcase in the afternoon sun. As the light passed through the thin fabric, faint threads and faded lines appeared, like the stitches time had sewn across the sole. The pillow couldn't speak, but it had heard so many things Grandma never said out loud, quietly, just like the way she lived. She thought about sewing a new cover, but holding the scissors, she stopped. Instead, she added a soft layer inside, then carefully stitched the old floral cloth back over it. The old tear remained, but now wrapped in gentle care, like how she was trying to hold on to what Grandma left behind, not erasing, just layering love on top. That night, she sat with the pillow behind her, in the same place Grandma once did. Outside, the rain whispered. No tea, no radio, just wind and the quiet falling of something inside her. But she felt calm. That little pillow wasn't just holding her back, it was holding her heart, tired but finally softening. Grandma's kitchen looked just the same. The smell of old wood, roasted pepper, and long-ago mornings still lingered in the air. On the high shelf sat a small brown radio, dusty with a slightly bent antenna. She stared at it, unsure if it still worked. She slowly turned the dial. A soft crackle, then silence. And then a faint tune began to play, like a memory breathing softly back to life. That melody, she couldn't recall the name, but it was familiar. It was what Grandma used to play every morning while boiling water for tea or washing herbs in the sink. instrumental, no lyrics, but somehow it sounded like an entire peaceful morning folded into a few simple notes. She sat on the wooden stool, letting herself drift back to those clean, quiet mornings that would never return. People often keep photos or trinkets, but maybe sound lasts longer. The clink of spoons in a porcelain cup, the tapping of wooden sandals on a cement floor, and the quiet buzz of the radio, imperfect but full. It was the voice of home, she thought, and something in her softened. She switched to another station. A low voice read the morning news. She smiled without meaning to. Grandma used to listen too, and always sighed, "Only storms and politics, nothing cheerful." But still, she tuned in every morning, a ritual, a way to keep the kitchen from falling silent. There was a time the radio stopped working. Grandma said nothing, but the kitchen felt different. No music, no voices, just silence, as if something essential had been taken away. A few days later, Grandpa fixed it. Grandma only said, "Oh, I didn't really miss it." But after that, she lingered longer in the kitchen, added a little more salt, a little more soul to every meal. Grandma once said, "Radios are different from TVs. They keep you company." She hadn't understood then. Now she did. On lonely nights, you don't need something to look at, just a voice, a hum, and suddenly the silence isn't so alone. That night, she carried the radio up to her room. Soft music played. Then came a listener's letter, read aloud by a woman with a calm, low voice. Something about that voice. It wasn't Grandma's, but it sounded close, too close. Her chest tightened. A few days later, she wiped off the dust, changed the batteries, and placed the radio back in its spot. No one needed to turn it on every day, but knowing it worked, that was enough. Like Grandma, she was no longer here, but her voice, her breath, her presence remained, quietly, steadily, just like the hum of an old radio. Small radio, small kitchen, but its sound filled the heart. She was cleaning the small room at the end of the hallway, a room no one had really entered since Grandma passed away. There stood an old wooden cabinet, its doors secured with a rusty latch. Down near the bottom, there was a low, dark shelf. As she knelt and opened the cabinet wide, something caught her eye, a tiny edge of paper peeking out from behind the panel. She gently peeled it free. It was a faded black and white photo taped to the wood with yellowing paper tape. A young woman stood beside a man. The image was blurred with time. No one had ever mentioned this photo. No one had displayed it. But the way it was taped, carefully, securely, it felt like someone didn't want to lose it, but also didn't want it to be seen. She looked closely and suddenly saw it. The eyes. They were unmistakable. They were Grandma's. But this was a younger version. Bright eyes, full cheeks, untouched by wrinkles or time. The man beside her, someone she had never seen, not Grandpa. Grandma had never spoken of anyone before Grandpa, that sometimes, during quiet afternoons, Grandma would stare out the window, her gaze floating somewhere far away. Maybe this wasn't a secret. Maybe it was just something old and private, too soft to ever need saying out loud. Not in an album, not on a wall, not in a drawer. Grandma had chosen to tape the photo inside the cabinet door, a place no one would think to look. It was like keeping a small piece of who she once was. Not thrown away, not displayed, just a gentle way of saying, "I still remember." She didn't need to know who the man was, didn't need to ask her mother or dig through anyone else's memory. She just looked into Grandma's younger eyes and knew that it had once been something beautiful. Maybe it didn't last, maybe it slipped away, but it was cherished enough to be kept behind a quiet cabinet door. After a pause, she didn't pocket the photo. She taped it back where it had been, with fresh tape, not because she didn't care, but because she wanted to honor how Grandma had chosen to keep it. Everyone has a quiet corner of their own, and not all corners are meant to be entered. She closed the cabinet, gently, softly. The photo didn't speak. There was no message written on the back, but somehow she understood Grandma better, not through stories, but through the way she stayed silent. Behind every gentle person is a quiet place where they once stood strong and never said a word. While sorting through old clothes, she pulled open a drawer she rarely touched. Tucked among old scarves, knitted sweaters, and the faint scent of dried lavender lay a delicate floral dress, neatly folded. Soft pinks and pale blues, a vintage pattern, one corner slightly frayed. She realized this was the dress Grandma used to wear every spring. She carefully slipped into the dress. A little loose, but not too long. When she twirled softly, the hem floated like petals. Suddenly, it felt like someone was holding her, a warmth she hadn't realized she missed. Grandma rarely bought new things, but once, after a hard year, she bought this fabric and sewed the dress herself. Not to look pretty, she said, but to remind myself I'm still worthy of love, even if only from me. After trying it on, she didn't refold it or tuck it away. She hung it by the window, where soft light streamed through. She wouldn't wear it out in public. This dress felt made for another world, a gentler one, where people lived slower and loved themselves more. Every time she passed the window, she glanced at the dress. It swayed gently in the breeze, still full of grace. No one wore it anymore, just like Grandma, no longer seen, but quietly keeping warmth in the corners of the house and her heart. Thank you for staying with this story. Some things are never finished, but they can still bring comfort if made with love. Some people may leave, but they never really disappear. Tonight, I hope you sleep peacefully, with a little warmth in your heart, from someone who has always loved you in the gentlest way. Good night.